Welcome back to my channel Celeb Buzz. Please share and subscribe and press the bell icon for new updates.
They say Hollywood is all glitz and glamour, but beneath the surface lies tension, rivalries, quiet wars that never made the headlines, and some that should've. This is a story of a man who stood tall, literally and morally, in an industry built on illusion, a man who kept his pain private. Until now, Clint Walker hated James Garner. Not dislike, not resentment, hatred. And for years, no one understood why. Both were titans of the golden age of television. Both helped define the Western genre. To the outside world, they seemed cut from the same cloth. Rugged, charming, dignified. But the truth was far more bitter. To understand Clint Walker's hatred, we have to go back. Back to a small town in Illinois. Back to the Great Depression, when a boy named Norman Eugene Walker learned what it meant to survive. Raised by hard-working parents who scraped together every dollar, Clint knew pain. He knew sacrifice. And more than anything, he learned respect. Respect for work. Respect for people. And he carried that with him, from the factory floor to riverboats, to the merchant marines during World War II. Before he ever stood in front of a camera, Clint Walker stood for something. So when Hollywood came knocking, he didn't bend. He brought his values with him. He didn't chase fame. It came to him. In 1955, when he became Cheyenne Bodie, the lone cowboy with a moral compass so strong, audiences saw him as more than an actor. They saw him as the man America wanted to be. But James Garner was different. Known for his smooth charm and effortless wit, Garner rose to fame as Brett Maverick. He was clever, irreverent, confident, a star, no doubt. But to Clint, he was something else entirely. Arrogant, dismissive, disrespectful. Clint saw through the grin. While others adored Garner's laid-back attitude, Clint couldn't stand it. To him, it wasn't cool, it was careless. Hollywood already had too many people who didn't take things seriously. Clint believed in earning every moment, every line, every ounce of respect. And Garner didn't. The tension between them boiled behind closed doors. Shared appearances were strained. Wardrobe trailers avoided. One would walk off at the moment the other arrived. Clint never spoke publicly about it, but the people closest to him knew. It wasn't jealousy. Clint never cared about who had more lines or screen time. What he couldn't forgive was character. There was one moment whispered about in old studio halls, when the two were seated side by side at a network event. Garner, cracking jokes, turning heads. Clint, silent, watching. At one point, Clint stood up, leaned in, and said just loud enough for only one man to hear, "You're laughing, but you've never worked a real day in your life." Garner said nothing back. The rift only widened with time. Even when both men were cast in The Dirty Dozen, one of the greatest ensemble war films of its era, Clint made it clear this was just a job. He'd show up, deliver his lines, hit his marks, and then disappear into the shadows. There would be no mingling, no handshakes, and certainly no words exchanged with James Garner. Not even once. Some cast members noticed it. Others pretended not to. Hollywood was used to quiet rivalries, but this one was different, colder, more final. They stood feet apart, but it felt like miles. And yet, Clint remained silent to the world. He didn't gossip. He didn't leak to the press. He didn't sit for scandal-ridden interviews or trashy memoirs. He didn't even correct a record when rumors painted him as difficult. That's not what he was after. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted peace. But peace doesn't always come easy, especially when it's tied to something that eats away at you for decades. It wasn't until after Clint's passing in 2018, at the age of 90, that the truth began to surface. Slowly, gently, as if those closest to him had waited long enough. Waited until they knew he was finally resting. Old friends, former co-stars, studio workers, men and women who had spent time around Clint, not just on camera, but in the quiet spaces in between. They began to speak, not with bitterness, but with reverence. Because Clint Walker wasn't just a TV cowboy. He was something rarer, especially in an industry like Hollywood. He was real, They told stories of men who valued eye contact, who remembered the names of the lighting crew, who stayed after wrap to shake the hands of extras, who once drove 2 hours out his way just to deliver a hand-signed photograph to a fan with cancer, because a promise is a promise. And they also told stories of his silence, of how, for years, Clint swallowed the tension he felt toward James Garner, how he kept it bottled up, how it simmered just below the surface, never exploding, but never leaving. To some, it seemed like professional jealousy, but that was never the truth. Clint Walker was never jealous of anyone, because Clint didn't define himself by success but by conduct. And that is where the conflict lived. To Clint, Hollywood was full of people who smiled for the cameras and scoffed when the lights went off. People who laughed at the crew behind their backs, who cut in line, who disrespected the makeup artists, who talked big about values on screen, and trashed them the moment the credits rolled. James Garner, for all his charm and fame, was, in Clint's eyes, exactly that. Careless, condescending, maybe even cruel. There were moments behind the scenes that no one ever saw. Comments, jokes, the way Garner would mock studio execs and then cozy up to them when the cameras started rolling. The way he'd treat lesser-known actors like stepping stones, not colleagues. Clint never forgot. Because for Clint, it wasn't about who you were on screen. It was about who you were when no one was watching. And James Garner never passed that test. There was one incident, rarely spoken of, during the filming of a publicity event. The cast of The Dirty Dozen had been gathered for press photos. Tensions were already high. Garner, as usual, was the center of attention, flashing that iconic smile, cracking jokes, charming everyone around him. But Clint didn't laugh. He stood off to the side, arms folded, and when the photographer asked him to move closer, to pose shoulder to shoulder with Garner, Clint's voice cut through the air like a knife. I stand next to men I respect, not pretenders. The room fell silent. Garner, avid performer, laughed it off. But the wound had already reopened. Clint never apologized. He didn't need to, because to him, what mattered wasn't the moment. It was the message. A man is defined by what he stands for, especially when it costs him something. Even in his later years, when his acting slowed and the spotlight dimmed, Clint held firm to that belief. He attended fan conventions, signed autographs, talked to veteran single mothers and starstruck fans with the same quiet dignity. He never put himself above anyone. Because Clint Walker never believed fame made you better. It just made you visible. And visibility, to Clint, was a responsibility. So when people ask why he hated James Garner, the answer isn't easy. It wasn't about money, or women, or roles. It wasn't about competition. It was about something deeper, something unspoken, something sacred. It was about principle. Not the kind you wear on your sleeve. The kind you carry, quietly, like a weight on your back or a compass in your chest. Principles that don't change when the cameras roll or when the stakes rise. Principles that cost you because they mean something. To Clint Walker, being a man wasn't about the fame or the applause or the number of films to your name. It was about character. The kind of character that didn't end when he yelled, "Cut." And when Clint looked at James Garner, he didn't see that. Not really. To the world, Garner was beloved, charismatic, handsome, clever. He cracked jokes, wore that crooked smile, made everyone in the room feel like they were in on the secret. People loved that about him. But Clinton, he saw the cracks beneath the charm. He saw the arrogance that hid behind the wit. He saw a man who had every opportunity to be a leader, to stand for something, and instead chose the easy way. Garner leaned on sarcasm, on cynicism. He coasted on reputation. He played the game, smooth, easy, never too deep. But Clint Walker? He never coasted. He climbed. He climbed from the factories of Illinois to the merchant marines in wartime. From lifting heavy loads on riverboats to carrying entire TV shows on his back. He wasn't handed anything. He earned it every step of the way. And so, when he saw men in Hollywood who treated others as props, who tossed around words like respect, but never lived them, it didn't sit right, especially not with Garner. It wasn't personal. At least, not at first. It was principled. Because Clint Walker didn't just believe in doing things right. He believed in being right inside. And James Garner was to him a man who could have been great, but wasn't. And that was what hurt. Clint didn't hate Garner for what he was. He hated him for what he wasn't. He wasn't humble. He wasn't grounded. He wasn't grateful. And in Clint's world, those weren't optional qualities. They were essential. Clint came from a generation where men didn't talk much about their values. They lived them, where a handshake meant something, where loyalty wasn't a line in a script. It was a way of life. And when he stepped into Hollywood, tall, stoic, and full of purpose, he didn't leave those values behind. He brought them with him. Every scene, every set, every silence. So he stood beside Garner on the Dirty Dozen, or rather, it wasn't just coldness. It was conviction. He didn't need to speak to James Garner, because what he felt couldn't be fixed with words. It wasn't a feud. It was a fundamental fracture in worldview, in integrity, in everything Clint held dear. And that kind of wound doesn't bleed. It burns. Maybe that's why he never aired it out, never told the press, never named names, because real hurt stays quiet. And Clint Walker was a quiet man. He didn't perform pain for attention. He endured it. That's the thing about men like Clint. You don't always know what they're carrying until they're gone. When he passed in 2018, the tributes poured in. Co-workers, fans, directors, veterans, all speaking of his dignity, his strength, his unwavering decency. But some spoke of his silences, of the things he never said out loud, of the times he chose solitude over confrontation, and of the one man he never forgave. James Garner died in 2014, 4 years before Clint, and he never addressed attention either. Perhaps he didn't see it the same way. Perhaps he didn't even notice. Or maybe, deep down, he knew. Because when a man like Clint Walker refuses to share space with you, not out of anger, but out of principle, you feel it, even in silence. Especially in silence. That's the thing. Clint's silence wasn't empty. It was full of meaning, full of disappointment, full of expectation. That men would be better, do better, lie better. He expected more from his industry, from his co-stars, from the men who wore the same boots and cowboy hats, who stood under the same western skies and spoke of justice, truth, and grit. But it wasn't enough to play a hero on screen. Clint believed you had to be one off screen, too. And James Garner, for all his accolades, never lived up to that code. It's easy now, in the age of viral sound bites and Hollywood gossip, to dismiss these tensions as petty, to laugh them off, to call them egos. But for Clint, this wasn't about ego. It was about honor, that old-fashioned word, that today gets rolled eyes and sarcastic smirks. People call it outdated, rigid, unrealistic. But to Clint Walker, honor wasn't a costume. It wasn't a prop. It wasn't a line on a poster. It was everything. It was who he was when no one was watching. It was how he treated the waitress, how he treated the crew, how he treated the man no one else noticed. And that is what separated him. That's why the silence meant something. Because when a man like Clint chooses not to speak, it's not because he's afraid. It's because he's already said enough, just by living the truth. And maybe that's what makes the story so haunting. Not the hatred, not even the disappointment, but the standard he held quietly until the very end. A standard the world may never see again. If the story moved you, if it made you feel something, anything, take a moment like this video. Subscribe to Celeb Buzz for more stories that peel back the curtain. And tell us in the comments what you think really happened between Clint Walker and James Garner.